When you forgive decent people who make the mistakes of life and who try to do better after that, that's wonderful. And it can strengthen a relationship. When you forgive antagonistic people who don't give a damn that they hurt you, you remain forever stuck in their betraying system. So let's talk about forgiveness and entitlement and narcissism. We know where this is going. So I recently heard a story about a husband who repeatedly for many years betrayed his wife. The details of the betrayal are not important, but it was really awful. Malignant narcissistic stuff for the entire marriage. And he kept doing it and doing it and doing it. She never had any evidence, and then he got caught. He finally got caught. And he Darvoed his way through it. Once he finally got caught, there was actually evidence of it. Deny it, remember Darvo, deny attack. He played the victim. He made it sound like he betrayed her because she wasn't always there for him the way he wanted. She, upon learning all of this, decides to leave him. And leave him in his pile of public shame, loss of friends, loss of face. He then did a pathetic dance and started asking for forgiveness from this wife he had betrayed for over 40 years and their adult children. Please give me your forgiveness. I need your forgiveness to help me heal. I kid you not. This person who had been emotionally and also physically abusing his wife for decades to the point that she had developed depression, pretty significant issues with her physical health. She begged and pleaded throughout the marriage for him to be better. He just gaslighted her, told her she was crazy. And then when he finally got caught, he attempted to blame shift, rationalize it, and then everyone saw him for what he was. The proverbial mask fell off and the jig was up. As you'd expect, he deflated a little bit, but it seemed as though, after getting caught, instead of coming clean, he was trying to re-strategize, figure out a way to keep looking good to the world, a common narcissistic play. He even went so far to say that everyone cheats on their wives. I'm just being turned into an example for everyone to feel better about themselves. He even went on to keep saying he went and contacted the wife of a friend and he told her about her husband's cheating so he could maintain this idea that he was just unfairly targeted in a vast sea of cheating husbands, so he blew up their marriage too. But the piece that stuck with me was the asking for forgiveness to help me heal. So let's unpack that for a minute, because these moments are what make this fraught space of forgiveness in narcissistic relationships even more fraught. The prevailing ideology is that the bigger person will forgive, or that to forgive is somehow a compassionate thing to do. The wife in this particular scenario really suffered and struggled with self-blame, self-doubt, and like I said, physical illness for years. And that means that this pathetic ask for forgiveness that he was making of her and their kids plays on these old wounds, trauma bonds, and fears. Remember, though, that this husband had screamed and yelled and humiliated and deflected and blame shifted, and he kept yammering about smear campaigns. Only when none of his old tricks were working, only when the bottom fully fell out, only when he got caught, did he ask for the ultimate form of absolution, forgiveness, as though that would somehow clean the slate. So narcissistic people, as a rule, feel entitled to forgiveness, especially if they sort of kind of cop to the bad thing. So they might say something like, okay, yes, fine, yes, I cheated. You're making too big a deal out of it and twisting the story, but sure, yes, I cheated. So somehow a confession after a person gaslights you for a long time, folks, is deeply unsatisfying. A narcissistic person will only come clean if their back is against the wall. You literally need a smoking gun, video evidence, and signed confessions. And then, because they don't have a choice in a way, they may come clean just to preserve whatever's left of their public image. Keep in mind that they won't come clean because it's the right thing to do to help you feel whole, or even because certainly of integrity. No way. They come clean because they have no choice. And they will then try to pivot that confession into how they need forgiveness because they feel entitled to, because look, I'm coming clean. Or they do some kind of nonsensical, hollow repair work, like they go to therapy or rehab for 2 weeks or the like. But yes, they feel entitled to everything, and they definitely feel entitled to your forgiveness. But in this story, the narcissistic person was literally asking for forgiveness so he could heal. I mean, that's too much, right? This man never had any concern or care for the harm that he caused or the healing others had to do for decades because of his terrible behavior. But now is asking for something that he doesn't deserve so that he can heal, whatever that means. And this is also a future fake, because someone who is still trauma bonded may still hold on to that sad hope that, well, maybe if I forgive them, then the narcissistic person will heal. And I guess the hope is what? That they'll be honorable, they'll be kind. That's not what's going to happen. They just want the public cleaning of the slate. It won't happen. And instead, if this person forgives, the wife had forgiven, it will be that the narcissistic person will then want to start showing up in public with that partner they harmed, a sort of re-shaming for the partner who might have forgiven, and senses, whoops, it looks like no healing is taking place, that the whole thing was a ruse. It can actually really take a survivor of one of these relationships and push them way back. You know my feelings about forgiveness in these relationships. I have to tell you, generally not a great idea in narcissistic relationships. Maybe years and years and years down the road after you've committed to your healing, or maybe in a place where you can end the relationship and even go no contact, or perhaps if the narcissistic person passes away down the line years from now, maybe then something that feels like forgiveness may happen. But it doesn't work if you do it because the narcissistic person asked for it or feels entitled to it, or if it's still early days. Listen, getting a presidential pardon doesn't mean you didn't do the crime. It typically means you got lucky and a person with power is throwing you a bone, right? Pardons, forgiveness, it doesn't mean the person didn't do something. The forgiveness is that pardon that they hope for. It's never about accountability for the narcissist. It's always about optics. I know I keep coming back to this forgiveness topic, but I'm seeing how many questions I get about it from people who are going through these relationships. It is such a fraught topic for survivors who feel like terrible people because they don't want to survive. And I hear more and more and more examples of these scenarios. I think that they do bear discussing and rediscussing because so many survivors of narcissistic relationships grapple with the sense that I'm a bad person because they aren't forgiving the narcissist. It's a setup. Forgiving them may actually lead to a greater sense of shame for you because then you end up feeling played. These relationships are basically a game of pick your poison. But the poison that allows you to at least hold authentically to the knowledge that they won't change, not forgiving them, may still hurt you with the self-blame and that maybe I'm the bad one sense. But that, I promise you, will pass. What doesn't pass is that sense of shame of giving the gift of forgiveness to a person who feels entitled to it and then having your trust breached repeatedly. Nobody's entitled to forgiveness. Listen, we may do bad things, and if somebody chooses not to forgive us, we're not entitled to it either. But least of all, entitled to forgiveness is a person who, without empathy and with utter selfishness and lack of regard, is willing to hurt you over and over again and is asking for your forgiveness without any awareness of the pain they've caused you. That's not forgiveness. You know how I tell you that you should not tell the narcissist you know they're narcissistic or think they're narcissistic? This video is around forgiveness. And in the same vein, don't tell people that you're not going to forgive, that you're not going to forgive them. Let's talk a little bit about this. Again, it's the same vibe as not telling people they're narcissistic, but you may be wondering why this, right? You're not going to tell a narcissistic person they're narcissistic. You're not going to tell a gaslighter they're a gaslighter. Not only is there no point to telling them that, you lose a tactical advantage All of what I try to do, attempting to educate people about these dynamics, has never been about clapping back at the narcissistic folks or getting them to change. It has been about wanting everyone else to understand this, so they stop over-engaging with the narcissistic folks, stop giving the narcissistic folks supply, and wasting lifetimes thinking that the narcissistic people will change. Something very similar happens with forgiveness. Forgiveness is such a thorny topic as it relates to narcissism. We like to think of forgiveness as an all good kind of thing. All forgiveness is great. Forgiveness is divine. Forgiveness is how we grow. You don't need to carry that weight around by not forgiving. The fact is, not forgiving doesn't mean that you will be carrying a weight around. In fact, forgiving may be what will end you carrying the weight around. The research is clear. Forgiving a person who re-betrays and who re-harms you actually is harmful to you. So forgiving a narcissistic person in general is probably not good for your health. But the fact is, forgiveness has a strong brand and a strong lobby. All major religions, lots of sages and pundits and philosophers all love forgiveness. But the way they talk about forgiveness is intellectual. Sure, it's a good idea, but forgiveness really only works if the forgiveness results in change or awareness. In the absence of that, it means you are being vulnerable just to end up being played. And when people are played and taken advantage of, they don't heal. And I am also not buying all of this hooey about forgiveness helps the forgiver. Again, only if A, you're able to get out of the narcissistic relationship with them. In other words, you get to have nothing more to do with them. So that would be like if you had a relationship with a narcissist who did a number on you, and you ended the relationship, and you say, hey, we're done. I have blocked you, and I never want to be in touch with you again. Sure, you want to forgive? You forgive. You're out of harm's way. Or the person who does that with a friend or a family member. And listen, even then, forgiving a transgression that shaped the arc of your life, or a lifetime or decades that so betrayed and harmed you that you stopped trusting yourself and the world, how the F are you supposed to forgive that? It would not help you to forgive that. It would help you to recognize that you can still heal after that, though. But really, do you truly no longer resent someone who did something like that to you? The other times forgiveness may help the forgiver is so many years down the road that I even wonder if it's forgiveness as much as it is, you have nothing to do with my life anymore and I don't care what happens to you. Is that forgiveness? Or is that indifference? But if you have to keep dealing with someone, family, partner, ex-partner, colleague who harmed you, and if it's a narcissistic person, they harmed you more than once. Can you forgive them if they truly don't think they did anything wrong? Can you forgive them if they blamed you for everything that happened in the relationship? If they take no responsibility? Probably not. And I know people like to forgive. They like to put up fanciful social media posts about forgiveness. Don't do it. It's bad for yourself and frankly everyone else when you do. But this goes back to the original issue. Why shouldn't you tell them? Why? Because forgiving is a very personal decision, a very internal decision. Many narcissistic people in relationships with you that you can't leave, and no judgment, there's always lots of reasons that people stay. But if you still have to deal with them, you still have to see them. It could be a co-parent. It could be a family member in a larger family system. It could be a colleague in a job that you can't leave. Telling them that you won't forgive them actually hurts you in many ways. First, people will judge you. they will think you are the antagonist, the problem, the one who needs to find some sort of enlightenment. It's not worth feeling like you have to endure that. Second, not telling someone that you are not forgiving them. It's actually a superpower of sorts. You know internally that you don't forgive them. And that's all that matters. So that means you may give yourself more permission to disengage. Stop waiting for something that's not going to happen. Stop waiting for change. And to actually press the accelerator on radical acceptance. When you stay in something where you don't forgive, you are actually in a position where you aren't having the same arguments over and over again. Listen, people have very complex reasons for maintaining ongoing relationships with narcissistic folks. But when you know internally that you don't forgive, you're usually not waiting for them to behave better. You know they are them. In many ways, not forgiving and radical acceptance go hand in hand. A third reason you don't want to tell them that you're not going to forgive them, you're going to avoid their pushback on how they think you're a terrible person and that you're the narcissist and how you're a whole laundry list of terrible things because you don't forgive them. You don't need to hear that, especially if they have already betrayed you. Fourth, and this fourth one is a bit convoluted, so bear with me. If you don't say anything about how you're not going to forgive them, the narcissistic person is grandiose and entitled enough to actually believe they were forgiven because you're still showing up, right? So they don't pretend to be better. They're more likely to slip up and behave badly in front of someone else, which is actually to your advantage. The more people that can see how awful this person is, the more support that you might get. This is a long shot, but you not saying anything and them believing as a result they were forgiven may embolden them. And then they can shoot themselves in the foot. If you tell them, I don't forgive you, they may actually try to mess with you and behave in a way that's better for a minute, and especially in front of other people, to disprove your thesis. Fifth, not telling them that you're going to forgive them. It allows you to disengage. If you tell them that you don't forgive them, it's kind of like you still care. The key is to work towards something resembling indifference. The less you engage, the more they are sometimes on their back foot. Some of you may think, if I disengage, they'll just find someone else. If that's what their path was going to be, they were going to do that anyhow. This is why gray rock and yellow rock kind of work. Not telling them you don't forgive them is one more form of disengagement. It pulls you out of their orbit. Listen, under the right circumstances, forgiveness can be a great thing. It is a personal experience that should not be predicated on the other person's future behavior or changing their behavior. You forgive and that's that. But if they keep harming you, then forgiving is not good for you. While the mythical religious stories are out there about people who forgave and who were forever revered, those stories exist in every world religion. But we are not deities. We are not gods amongst us. We're just people with hearts that break and souls that bruise. Inauthentic forgiveness is great for the narcissist and terrible for you. When you forgive decent people who make the mistakes of life and who try to do better after that, that's wonderful, and it can strengthen a relationship. When you forgive antagonistic people who don't give a damn that they hurt you, you remain forever stuck in their betraying system. But when you decide, you finally say, I can't, I won't forgive someone who harmed me this much, and that's your authentic truth, then like all authentic truths, do not share them with the narcissist. It's not good for you. But the not forgiving in the long term may actually be great for you. It may help you get to radical acceptance, and break you out of the hypnosis. That's the narcissistic relationship. Most people think forgiveness is great. Some people even think it's necessary. They believe it sets us free, that it's noble, that it shows us that we are somehow evolved, that we have released the person who harmed us, that we aren't sidled with the poison of what they did to us. But that, however, that kind of thinking is based on a model of forgiveness that assumes that the person you forgive receives it as a call to action to be better, a place to make amends, to change their ways, and to engage in behaviors that leave you or whomever they harmed feeling safer again. When we forgive and that happens, sign me up. I'm all about forgiveness. None of us are perfect. To be forgiven for our missteps and then to receive that forgiveness as a gift, as a place to become better, to be more mindful, to not keep making the same mistakes, that is how forgiveness is supposed to work. But then there's the world of narcissistic relationships. It's like an upside-down world where the fundamental rules of human relationships no longer apply, where everything we were taught kind of goes upside down, where the world defends, or at least enables or excuses, the behavior of the person who continually psychologically and emotionally harms their partner or family member or friend, but who never gets called out themselves, where no matter how much empathy you show, it is not enough, where no matter what you do, it's not enough. I mean, let's face it. When we're told, oh, somebody's not forgiving, the picture we hold of a non-forgiving person is of an angry, bitter, resentful, dark-hearted, grudge-holding, inflexible, closed-hearted person, right? To me, actually, that sounds like a vulnerable narcissist. But let's face it. When people who have been profoundly and repeatedly hurt by someone who shows no signs of changing, who keeps doing the same harmful things and justifying them, or tells you that you are too sensitive for reacting to them, or gaslights you about them, I don't know how dark-hearted and bitter that is if you choose not to forgive that. The research shows that forgiving serial abusers, people who repeatedly do bad things and don't change even after you forgive them, it's not good for your well-being or your sense of self. It's like survivors of narcissistic relationships need one more damn thing to hurt their sense of self, right? That to keep on forgiving and to have them keep transgressing, it's simply not good for you. I don't think that makes you a dark, cold person to not forgive them. I think it makes you smart. And I'm telling you, I've seen the internet mob, especially the toxic positivity self-development space, cruelly attack people who will own up to the fact that they don't forgive someone. I've seen it happen firsthand. And those attackers never stop to learn the backstory behind that person's lack of forgiveness or unwillingness to forgive. The pressure, both by the larger social mob, by families, by groups of friends, by workplaces, it's strong. And it can be really hard to withstand, especially if you feel as though you are being held back by your own sense of self-doubt, with the narcissistic person's gaslighted assertions that you are the problem, that you are unkind for not forgiving them. This can mean that lots of folks in narcissistic relationships will give in to this forgiveness pressure. And that's absolutely understandable. You give in because you're empathic. To not be rejected out of hand as being mean people who are forgiving, that's why you give in, because you're not a mean person. Because if you don't give in to the forgiveness pressure, then you might actually lose a larger community of people. This can result in what we can only call a sort of non-consensual forgiveness. It's pressured. People forgive so they can keep fitting in. We may also forgive while we are in these relationships because trauma bonding is real. And as much as we have been hurt and recognize that this was not okay, forgiveness may represent a clean slate, a chance for a fresh start, a sort of betrayal blindness meets forgiveness is good, meets trauma bonded, thank goodness I don't have to leave yet, meets the normal human hope for love and attachment. Narcissistic people love forgiveness, right? They love that there's a sort of dry erase board that just gets wiped away, and they just keep getting to do their things, right? It's the ultimate setup for them because they actually feel entitled to that. So when they are forgiven, it fits their schema of the world. They're special. There shouldn't be consequences. Of course they should be forgiven, right? Most people in narcissistic relationships spend a long time forgiving. Years, lifetimes. It's what we were taught to do. We were indoctrinated into it. It's what you were raised on. And each time you do it, and the narcissistic person doesn't change, and we know they're probably not going to change, it can feel you feeling foolish, like you were played, helpless, hopeless, angry, frustrated, let down. People who write this positivity, self-development books about the joys of forgiveness and how it sets you free, I don't believe that they've been in a relationship with a narcissistic person who keeps breaking their heart again and again, and least of all a narcissistic person that they can't easily get away from. There are Instagram accounts and all sorts of programs focused on forgiveness. I got to tell you, it's a good brand. And it becomes a space where so many survivors of narcissistic relationships feel shamed. Either you keep doing it repeatedly and you get burned, or you don't do it and you get shamed for being cold and unforgiving. You might get called unempathic. You might even get called narcissistic. I have witnessed people who have said, I can't forgive them anymore. They have done too much harm. And then the family system around them would say something like, well, now look at you, who's unempathic now? Ain't that the pot calling, and you know all the rest of it, right? But let's face it, we are so focused on this conversation about forgiving the narcissistic person that we put that ahead of forgiving ourselves. And you may wonder, what exactly is it that we need to forgive ourselves for? Well, most of you who are survivors, you blame yourselves for not being enough, for being too extra, for asking too much, for being disloyal, for being mean, for choosing the narcissist, for being angry at parents and family members who invalidated you. You have to forgive yourselves, because to feel angry, hurt, betrayed, and then wanting to see these folks clearly and understand it, that's your salvation. If you are hell-bent on forgiving them, you do that, but you got to forgive yourself first. You do that, then we can talk about forgiveness. In the book, I call all of this, that entire section of this book is called The Treachery of Forgiveness. And let me tell you, it's a treacherous space in these relationships, whether you choose to forgive or not, or choose not to know, and perhaps down the road, whatever you choose, it's your call. But if when you finally, whatever you decide around forgiveness, I don't care if you do or you don't, but it's got to be from a place that feels authentic and whole to you. If you forgive and then stop forgiving, or if you don't forgive and then you do forgive, or if you never do, all of those options are great. You do what feels authentic for you. Just don't fake it. And just as an FYI, don't feel the need to tell them or anyone else that you don't forgive the narcissist. This is an experience you can hold internally. And whether you do or you don't, always remember that you can heal. Forgiveness is optional. So have you ever looked back at yourself, in your history, and how you behaved and how you were in a past narcissistic relationship? Frankly, any narcissistic relationship. It may have been an intimate relationship, a family relationship, a friend, even a workplace. And you look back a little like you're looking at someone you don't fully recognize in yourself. And you're almost thinking of yourself like, ew, or what was I thinking? Or why did I do that? Or how could I have done that? And the things you look back on and ask yourself, how could I have done that? Or why did I do that? Or why didn't I do it better? Or why was I just so ick? They aren't always related to the narcissistic relationship. Sometimes we look back and wonder, why wasn't I thriving or doing better in the other things I was doing? For example, I've talked and worked with lots of folks who look back on things like how they were in a job or a professional setting, or how they were in raising their children. And they regret many things they did, more than the regret than the average person would experience. But they also recognize they were often distracted and thrown off by their narcissistic relationship, or they were running themselves ragged to please the narcissistic person so that other things were going poorly in their lives because they just couldn't bring their full selves to anything but the impossible task of trying to please the narcissistic person. Has that ever been you, that you look back and say, ooh, that's how I was? My guess it's been most of us. These regrets, looking back at ourselves in these relationships, often hold people back from moving forward and fully healing from narcissistic or toxic, invalidating relationships. When we are in a narcissistic relationship, or even in the early stages of healing, we're confused. These relationships, by definition, are confusing because they are not always bad. They are sometimes even good. They may give us a sense of belonging. We may need them for our very survival. But when they are bad, they are really bad and, frankly, psychologically harmful. So we are not at our best. Confused people, for example, are not efficient or organized. Confused people are distracted. Because when we are in the throes of the narcissistic relationship and really do not understand what is happening to us, we put everything into the narcissistic relationship, believing that there's some combination of things we can do to finally get it right. It can take a long time to realize that this isn't about getting it right or being enough, because those things aren't possible. It's nothing we do is ever going to be enough for a narcissistic person. And that is a them thing, not a you thing. It's kind of a miracle, to me at least, that people in narcissistic relationships or systems actually wake up every day and fight the good fight. One way we as clinicians can often discern the difference between a person going through narcissistic abuse from other clinical issues like generalized anxiety or depression is that the person going through narcissistic abuse will often thrive or shine or be happy when they're not with the narcissistic person. They'll often be happy when they're amongst the healthy people who are in their lives or doing something that they enjoy doing separate from the narcissistic person. The heaviness, the sadness, the frustration and worry all emanate from the unsolvable puzzle of the narcissistic relationship. Don't get me wrong. There are more than a small proportion of people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, who are also enduring other major psychiatric issues such as depression or relatively severe anxiety. But for many, the time with the narcissistic person is what's at the core of the unhappiness and the haze and the self-blame of why can't I be good enough to make this relationship work. But when we take that person and put them into something that's enjoyable or fun, they're in it, which we wouldn't see in somebody who might be experiencing other clinical issues. So when you look back at the things where you cringe and say, I wish I had been better, gosh, I wish I'd been stronger, I wish I'd been more courageous, I wish I'd broken up with them sooner, I wish I'd been more focused in school, in my job, I wish I'd been more a present parent or a better friend, I wish I'd been a better family member to my good family members instead of constantly spinning around and trying to do for the selfish ones. When you look back at that, you have to remember and really tell yourself that in most cases, you did the very best you could under the circumstances. And the fact is, nobody explained what the circumstances were to you. Basically, you were trying to climb a mountain with a 200-pound bag on your back, and you weren't aware that 200-pound bag was on your back, and you were wondering why you were struggling so much to get up the slope. It is essential to look back at the you that was in the relationship, the you that was slowly transitioning out of the relationship, the you that was attempting to heal and recognize that you was up against a lot. Even if you were in therapy, and if the therapist did not use the frame of how a narcissistic relationship works, or you're being given the standard lines of communicate more clearly, or have date nights, or you were being told that family is everything and you only have one mother kind of nonsense. You were actually trying to work and do a big jigsaw puzzle that had lots of pieces missing, and you were wondering why you couldn't see it clearly or get it done. And we have really finite resources within us to get through a day. We cannot be perfect at work and perfect in our caregiving or household responsibilities and perfect with all of our friends and perfect with how we take care of ourselves. Even on a good day, that's not possible. But we sure as hell can't even get close to getting anything even right if we're running around in circles trying to read a narcissistic person's mind while trying to do all of these other things. Most of us, when we were in these narcissistic relationships, did the best we can with the information we had. We actually remembered to put together healthy lunches for kids, even as our mind was racing and playing out abusive conversations repeatedly over and over in our heads. We showed up at work and probably did better than we thought, despite getting unreasonable and demanding text messages from the narcissists in our lives all day. We made holidays happen despite the toxicity inherent in those days. We got through life running on 2 tracks. One track was the rumination about the narcissistic relationships we were in, and the other track was the stuff we actually had to do in the present moment to keep life going. You have to remember that when you were in the muck of the narcissistic relationship, none of us were our best selves. Especially before you recognize what a narcissistic relationship is and still didn't fully understand it. Narcissistic relationships are parasitic and basically siphon off the best parts of ourselves, leaving us to make do with what is left. That is, until we understand how these relationships work. One of the places that all of this plays out most painfully is in the area of parenting. When you are in a relationship with or married to a narcissistic person and, for example, trying to raise children, it is all but impossible to be a fully present parent. Before you know what narcissism is about, you are trying your hardest to make the relationship or the marriage work, or you are still in denial about the idea that your partner or spouse will ever contribute equally to parenting. So you eternally have the same arguments with them about school pickups and bath time. Some of you may have had to endure the hellscape of co-parenting with a narcissist and the abuse, the pettiness, the fear, the anger, and the having to communicate regularly with someone you hope to never have to see again. And it can really erode for a period of time our capacity to be our best selves as parents. And we may look back and recognize that we were distracted or irritable or not present, or may have said the wrong thing or missed something our children were going through. And in some cases, one of your children may grow up and start showing narcissistic patterns as an adult. And the first place many parents in this situation will go to, especially the non-narcissistic parent, is to blame themselves, feeling that, well, I wasn't present and I didn't protect them enough from the narcissistic parent, etc., etc. Those of you who've gone through this, you know the drill. It's not that simple. Because those of you who may have a narcissistic child, if you do have more than one child, you may see that not all of them are narcissistic or manipulative, and you are the same with all of them. But when we look back at who we were before we fully understand this, we are very hard on ourselves. And even when we do understand it, we're still hard on ourselves. You did your best in a terrible situation. Most of us did. Nobody is graceful when they are trying to survive. We are messy, unshowered, brittle, distracted, angry, sad, tired. Think of yourself in an airport after 24 hours and 2 days of flight cancellations. You ain't at your best. When we are in narcissistic relationships, we are feeling like that every day. You did your best in a tough, impossible situation, and you learned, and hopefully are radically accepting and grieving and shifting and caring for yourself and discerning and distancing and disengaging. Healing at its core is about being gentler with ourselves. Start by reframing those regrets. You didn't do badly. You actually did your best under toxic circumstances you didn't understand. Now you do, and it will get a little easier with each day. Thanks again.